Live from Atlanta, Georgia, on this Wednesday, Hump Day, 30th of April, 2014. My name is Charlie Maverick. This is the MavCast, baby.
Relax yourself, let your conscience be free. You now rolling with the dude named MAV. Relax yourself, let your conscience free. You now rolling with the dude named MAV. Relax yourself, let your conscience free. You now rolling with the dude named MAV. Relax yourself, let your conscience be free. You now rolling with the dude named MAV.
Happy Hump Day, everyone. Thank you for joining and watching the show, listening to the show, whichever way that you consume this show. Thank you. Appreciate it. Um, Forgot to say this yesterday, but I want to give a heartfelt shout out to the people affected in Tupelo, Mississippi, and Arkansas, the lives that have been lost in the violent storms and the tornadoes, and also the people that have not experienced loss, but loss in loved ones, but loss in possessions and businesses. I do hope that God blesses you going forward, and I do feel for your situation right now. So, tech news has been slow lately, right? You guys have been wondering, when am I going to talk about tech news again? Well, today is the day that tech news returns. There's been some things that have come out that I really didn't want to talk about because it wasn't substantial enough. It didn't tickle my fancy, if I must say that in that manner. And the way that the tech news works, you have a whole flood of it, then you have a whole bunch of nothing. Then you have a whole flood of it, then you have a whole bunch of nothing. Then you have a little stagnant little bits and pieces that hit once, twice a day. And some stuff you really don't care about, some stuff you really want to talk about. And lately has been stuff that has been little itsy bits of stuff that I really didn't want to talk about. After that whole flood of tech news when the show first started consistently in the morning. Well, to fill the gaps, as you have known, I have talked about other topics, social issues, um, you can give or take if you want to say issues or not, but I've had a guest on talk about different things other than tech. But today, we get back to the fundamentals, if you want to say. So today's topic is about Android Silver. Before I unveil what Android Silver is, I want to do a little backstory about it, which is going to lead up to what Android Silver is. So hold on, be patient. I'm going to give you a little education lesson as if I was still the cell tech junkie from back in the day. So classic cell tech junkie info about to be dropped on you right now. Big shout out to AndroidCentral.com for posting this article so I can read and be interested in the midst of other news that I was not interested in. So, those of you that are familiar with Android and those of you that are cell tech junkies like me know that back in the day, a few years ago, let's say really late 2007, really early 2008, the Android came on the scene after the first iPhone. And the first Android phone that was released was the G1. Then there was the Magic, which was a smaller, low-cost version without a keyboard. So the G1 had the keyboard, and it was a really brick-like looking device. You look back at it now, and you're like, that was a ugly phone that was made by HTC in comparison to what the iPhone looked like. It wasn't metal; it was all plastic, and had a had a camera, but front-facing cameras wasn't in back then, and uh, had this hinge that popped out the keyboard. The screen size was pretty good compared to the iPhone, so you had a larger real estate area to consume web media. But it was a beginning device. It was a generation one. Then you had the Magic, which was I would say the female version of it. It was smaller, had a trackball, reminded you of a BlackBerry. I guess it was kind of trying to wean you off the BlackBerry. Then after that, you had the Nexus came out, the Nexus One, and these you can see three phones consecutively made by HTC. Now the Nexus One is one of uh, the most classically remembered Android phones in the history, along with the original Droid on Verizon. So Android lovers, enthusiasts, and fanboys alike identify the one of the best phones, and true nostalgia is synonymous with the Nexus One. The Nexus One was um, hardware and software wise, more hardware wise, a step in the right direction to what Android wanted to be. Then you had the software, which was not totally optimized right altogether to work with the hardware, but you see the potential that Android had. So when you look at the Nexus line at the time, that line sparked potential. That line sparked development. That was a developer's phone. Then you had the original Motorola Droid on Verizon, which of course is made by Motorola, and this phone was stripped down Android also. So you have three consecutive phones that were stripped down Android. Now there were some phones that got released, in between this by Motorola that went to T-Mobile, and those were not good phones. What was it? The Click. They got released. I was not a good phone. Sorry for you people that bought that. But the Motorola Droid really put Android on the map, and that was a consumer type developer phone. So it was still stripped down enough to where developers would appreciate it, but it was focused on the consumer to make it more appetizing to the general public. So if you look at the transition from the G1 to the actual Motorola Droid, you saw drastic improvements aesthetically and software-wise also. So when Android, please don't hurt me for this, but Android 2.1 came out. The software has always been known to come out on the Nexus first. So you get the kinks out so developers can develop, get the handle on it before it goes to the consumer line. Then after the Nexus 1 and the Droids gone away, you had other Nexus brands. You had Samsung took a hold. Samsung took a hold with two Nexus phones. So you had the Nexus S, you had the Galaxy Nexus. So those are three Nexus phones. Now, the Nexus S didn't sell so well because it wasn't advertised well. Samsung didn't put enough bucks into it because they still wanted to sell their Galaxy line. It was still kind of that nerd type device, that developer type device. Consumers didn't really want it unless they found a good deal when they went into Best Buy Mobile and got the phone either on T-Mobile or on Sprint. Now Verizon didn't carry it. AT&T, you can use it on AT&T, but that wasn't something that they were really pushing. The Galaxy Nexus was a major success and disappointment at the same time, depending on how you look at it. So you had the Galaxy Nexus, that was the GSM version, which on T-Mobile you can use it on AT&T. Sprint had a version. Verizon actually had a version. This was Verizon's first stab at the Nexus line to see how that was going to work out. Utter failure. It was a little bit better on Sprint, but those of you that have had the Galaxy Nexus on Verizon know, and I've had that phone on Verizon, you know that was an utter failure. It felt nothing in the realm as if you owning a Nexus device. The updates came to you so late. Other devices outside the Nexus line got updates before you did. You eventually got updates, but oh my gosh. So the hardware, although it was plastic, was very, very sexy aesthetics, and had a slight curve to it. The camera was terrible. Historically, the cameras at that point on Nexus devices have been subpar of subpar, so it's not been a selling point. The selling point has only been the software updates. And at that point, when Verizon kind of bastardized the Nexus, there was the selling point of the software updates kind of went out the window. But the GSM version, people loved that. It didn't have the fast data that we are used to now. It didn't have the 4G capabilities. It still was that, maybe HSPA plus, but it was not definitely. It definitely was not 4G LTE. And there was an LTE version on the GSM line. So Sprint and Verizon had them. However, you have to remember, however, that delayed updates on those versions because those weren't the versions that were released directly from Google, and they had different, mock-up numbers. They had different model numbers on the software, base bands, I should say, version numbers. So they had to make it compatible with the frequencies. So different things had to happen. And if you had a Nexus, you know how to root a phone anyway. It was easily rootable. Bootloader was easily unlocked. And then you can do whatever you want, get the updates from forums and whatnot to keep your phone updated. That's personally how I kept my Nexus in a Nexus state without putting an entirely new, crazy, outlandish ROM on it. And those of you that know Nexus devices are familiar with the ROM community. So roaming has drastically gone down in the Android community. And why has that happened? The consumer phones, for the most part, have taken most of the things that we were lacking in the software and have put them in with the help of Samsung and whatnot, putting what we called at the time gimmick features in the phones. Now they are, the standard. So we have good camera software. We have gestures and all that. So let's move on to the Nexus 4. The Nexus 4 was the first stab at LG's version of the Nexus. All glass on front, all glass on back, beautiful pattern. It had HSPA plus. There was no CDMA version. So Sprint and Verizon, because Verizon messed up with the Galaxy Nexus, there was none of that put out there. None of those models put out there for those two carriers. And when you think about that version of the Nexus, it kind of was a failure in comparison to the Galaxy Nexus. Because of marketability, you really didn't see any marketing for that phone. You really only got the phone if you were a real Android enthusiast. And you got the phone through Google or somehow through T-Mobile, maybe somehow got it on AT&T, but no one was selling it, right? So you thought of Nexus as the nerd. It was continuously the nerd's device. Are you getting a Nexus? Why are you getting a Nexus? It was a low-cost developer or fanboy device. No regular consumers were getting this unless, as I said before, there was a really good deal online, or they walked into the store and one carrier had this device and was trying to get it out the door months after its release, and they offered a free on contract deal to where some of the regular consumers got it. And you look at it, it worked fine. It was stable. It always had the latest updates. There was complaints again about the camera and maybe about, how it was made, but still the Nexus brand was still under scrutiny of not being a serious brand. Then you had the coming of the Nexus 5, which in all intensive purposes was a monster breakthrough for Google. Now still there was no Verizon version, but now it was back on Sprint. Aha! Aha. So they took a chance again. Now, across the board, it was 4G LTE compatible with the US versions. It had all the bands possible to run in on every carrier. However, Verizon restricted this from being on their network. Somehow, we saw the partnership with Verizon and Google come to a head, and they were like Clash of the Titans, and no one could come to terms of making a compromise so we can get this Nexus 5, which had a decent camera, really decent camera compared to the others. It had a soft touch back, really well made by LG again, had a large, bright screen, vibrant screen. Functionally, there were no major complaints about it, and it was a hit. It still is a hit right now. It's still selling right now. Some people on Sprint have this phone getting updates as they should. No complaints about that I've heard. Um, it's still not one of those products that consumers are like, I want to get this. It's still synonymous with nerdism. Did I make that up? Probably. It's still synonymous with the fanboys. Being a fanboy, you want the phone, you get that phone. It's still kind of that developer first device. It's a low cost, off contract option for you to do even if you're on prepaid. So if you're on prepaid, 350 will get you out the door with that, and you have a top tier spec phone, which is great. But it still did not have the marketability. It still did not have the bucks put up front to compete with Samsung and Apple in terms of its market share and its attention in the eyes of the regular consumer. You ask a person, or even if you bring a Nexus around someone, first question they're going to ask is that a Samsung? Nowhere on the phone did they see Samsung on there or the logo, but they will assume first that is a Samsung Galaxy device. Next, they're going to ask, for some reason, if they're far enough away, is that an iPhone? And it looks substantially larger than an iPhone, but it has a totally glass front, which might throw them off. Who knows? But they don't identify with the Nexus unless someone is that fanboy, is that enthusiast, is that person that's really, really knowledgeable about Android, all the aspects of Android. So now, with all that being said, Android, Google is taking a step forward, and rumors have been out for a while that Android is going to move away from the whole Nexus branding. It's the low cost solution with relatively high end specs, but not able to be marketed that well at all. Traditionally, we have 5 iterations of that thing that have out, and it's not 5 years later, still not popular, still not mainstream. Google's going to plan to change that. How are they going to change that? Android Silver. Android Silver is going to be the one that this initiative, this branding that they put a whole bunch of advertising bucks. How much? $1 billion worth to compete with the likes of Apple and Samsung. And what they're going to do with that money, in addition, is they're going to work with the carriers, work with the likes of Verizon, try to repair that relationship, and get them those sales associates trained on talking about the great things that are offered by this Android Silver device. It's going to be controlled totally by Google. And what that means is Google's going to have to work out a way to where they operate like Apple. Android is the dominant OS in the US right now and a lot of parts of the world, but the carriers still have leverage over what happens with the software updates with Android devices. Is that because it's not really partnered straight through Google and the carrier, or Is it just because that relations have never been solidified? Those relations never been solidified to where they are really serious about getting those updates out in a timely manner across the board on every carrier like Apple has. This can change the Android game substantially. So Android Silver is going to be totally controlled by Google, totally high in specs, totally um, beautiful hardware. It's going to be that device that is not low cost but high end on the same price as the iPhones and the Galaxy devices, the Galaxy Notes, the Galaxy S devices. They're going to be sitting right beside them in the stores. And this is not a Moto X type thing. See, Google had Motorola as a learning experience of how to have what not to do when you are trying to sell a consumer phone, right? Motorola had experience in selling consumer phones forever. Since the dawn of mobile time, they have had experience in selling uh, mobile phones. A lot of those have been failures. Two have been outstanding success stories: the original Razr, which was the flip phone, and the Motorola Droid. Now, before Samsung came, before Galaxy was synonymous with Android, which was the entire meaning of Android, you had people saying Droid, and that was fine, but people didn't know what they were talking about. Google's trying to take that back. Google is trying to take hold of their creation. Google is tired, and you gotta understand why they're doing this now. Google is tired of people capitalizing off of the software they created. They don't want to be another app, another Microsoft, to where like people like Dell made billions off of Microsoft, and they just built a shell to work with it. Lenovo, all of them. So Google sold Motorola to Lenovo. Now they have the people from Motorola that they wanted pulled into their camp, and there was talks of Project R, which was the modular phone. We don't know if that's still going to come to fruition or not, but I tell you what, they have gained enough experience, enough brain power to move forward with the design and the functionality and the marketability of Android Silver, especially since they have the people from Motorola and they still have good relations with Motorola, but they have the knowledge base from Motorola to go in and make a wearable device for Google Now. And we're going to see that. So in the next year, maybe 2015, it's going to be a while, people, but there are going to be talks and talks and talks continuously of Google going in and doing these acquisitions, these partnerships, these talks with the carriers, these boardroom brawls, if you want to say, to get things right, to lay the path for Android Silver to be a viable competitor to the likes of Samsung and Apple, to where you walk in the store and it might be codenamed Silver now, and it might be something totally different at the time. We're not saying this is going to be called, the device is called Android Silver. No, this is the initiative, the project that they're on right now. The focus is to make a high-end device, a high-end price tag. So if you have a high-end price tag that's on the line of Samsung and Apple, people will take you a lot more seriously. And if you do partnerships with the carriers, your selling point to that over a Samsung device, over a HTC device, is going to be, hey, we worked out the partnership deal with the carriers so they don't hold back the updates. We're going to have full reign over that. Whatever they want, we're not going to have any bloatware, excessive bloatware like they do on Samsung or HTC devices. No, that's not going to happen. You're not going to have crazy um, carrier specific apps. Matter of fact, we might not even let them put a logo of the carrier on the back or the front to make sure that that we have control of this. We want you consumer to know that we're Google, we're serious. We're not about to get out the game of making software for mobile devices anytime soon. You had a few people that left Google recently, and everyone is scared now. What's going to happen to Android? What's going to happen to Android? What's going to happen to Google? Big people are leaving and getting shifted off into different places. Look, there are geniuses beyond genius that work for Google. They know what they're doing. If you see over time the little pieces that they've put together, and as an example, you look at Google Plus, and people are like, "Well, what the heck is Google Plus? No one's on there. None of my friends are on there." Well, Google knows that they're not going to compete directly with Facebook. They never wanted to. But here's how they're different. Every consumption of media that you do, anything that's tied to your Gmail, Google Plus is the hub for everything you do within Google. Everything. This right now, look, if you don't support Google, that means you probably shouldn't watch this show because it's on YouTube. If you didn't know YouTube is owned by Google, then I'm sorry that you have lived under a rock or you are just that naive. But whatever. So, what does this mean for Samsung? What does this mean for Apple? Is it going to be a rush to change the whole paradigm shift? The way that people look at you? The way the relations that Samsung has with Google right now? Or is Samsung going to go ahead and focus on getting that Tizen software ready as they have on the Gear devices? Are they going to put Tizen on the devices instead of Android? Are they working the kinks out? Are they working the way that they want to do so they have the hardware and software on themselves? Because they really want to be like Apple. They want to have in-house hardware, in-house software, not dependent on anybody. Tizen would do that for them. Gives them full control, right? They'll be a really standalone dominant player and not have to depend on a third party getting software to them. They don't want to be like Microsoft devices that that have other pieces coming from other places. They want to be like Apple. They want to have in-house hardware manufacturing software. Even though Apple gets their stuff from other entities like Samsung and LG, they want to have it all in-house, right? So Google would have the possibilities to have everything in-house, hardware and software, which is big for them. And this might cause Samsung to go the Tizen route, which would have everyone's eyes wide open to see how that's going to turn out. Is it going to be mobile war? Are we going to have a three company war like we did in the early ages of Android? So Android, BlackBerry was still relevant at the time. Then you had the iPhone. So is that going to be like that deadly triangle, that axis of evil that goes on once Android Silver comes to fruition? Well, we'll have to stay tuned and see. Will the consumers look at Android in a whole different light? And will the Nexus brand still live as a low-cost option for emerging countries, emerging markets, and people that are just getting phones off contract? We got to see. Everything's just a rumor right now. The opening stages, we're in the planning stages. Ground has not been broken on this yet. So more details to come. The education of this will continue. But I thank you for allowing me to explain this in detail to you today to get you ready for Android Silver. And away. This has been the MavCast. You have a wonderful hump day.
Relax yourself, let your conscience be free. You now roll with the dude named MAV. Relax yourself, let your conscience free. You now rolling with the dude named MAV. Relax yourself, let your conscience free. You now rolling with the dude named MAV. Relax yourself, let your conscience be free. You now rolling with the dude named MAV.